Okay, welcome everyone. We're back with another New Jersey Film Festival Q&A session with one of the filmmakers. And we're also joined by two of the judges who were part of our jury for this season, but actually they hadn't seen the film we're going to be talking about. And so they've now jumped in, they've checked out the movie, and they have a lot of scintillating questions. Today, we're going to be talking to David Scott Kessler, who's the director extraordinaire of the documentary, The Pine Barrens, which is about the very famous region in New Jersey. So we're going to be talking about that for the next 20, 25 minutes. Before we actually jump in with the Q&A, and I introduce you to our other guests, just wanted to mention that the New Jersey Film Festival is going to be taking place from September 13th through October 25th. Actually, the movies end on the 23rd of October, and we'll announce the winners of the various prizes on the 25th. But if you go to our website, which is right behind me, njfilmfest.com, you'll click on where it says New Jersey Film Festival Fall 2020 schedule. And when you get to that page, you'll notice in blue, go to this link to buy tickets. You want to click on that link, and then you'll see all the wonderful movies we'll be screening. There'll be 41 films shown over 13 programs. And we'll hope you can join us virtually, because normally we would be doing this live. But because of COVID-19, we're doing this way. So anyway, today we have Stephanie Mann and Hamsa Hassan. They're going to be doing a lot of the Q&As for David. And just a little bit of information about David's film. It's going to be playing on Friday, October 9th. And the way our festival is working is that the films are available video on demand for 24 hours. So on Friday, October 9th at 12:01 a.m., so if you're a night owl, you can start watching the film at that time. If you start to get a little sleepy and you stop watching the movie, you still will have 24 hours to watch the film. Let's say you start watching it at 11:45 on Friday evening, the 9th, you still can watch it the next day to complete it. So you can watch it on the 10th if you start really late. Okay, so again, you want to get tickets, you go to njfilmfest.com, click on the schedule for the fall 2020 schedule, and then click on the link, which will take you to our Eventive site. Eventive is our sponsor. They're going to be providing the content virtually for us. So anyway, my first question will be to David. David, so how did you get involved in making this wonderful documentary about the Pine Barrens? It looks like it took you a long time to make this film.
Yeah, so it started back in 2011, really like the end of 2011, 2012. I was mostly at that point interested in exploring the experience of place, different ways that place is experienced, the sense of place, how it could exist on different levels, from the observable ecology of a place to the more magical, dreamlike, surreal aspect, and how those different experiences kind of are layered and kind of are experienced really at once, that there's not necessarily always a distinction. And I thought the Pine Barrens was a really great example of that type of place. And I had actually never been there before I started the film. I had really been working off of just preconceived ideas about the Pine Barrens. I grew up in New Jersey, so I had known about them. I've heard of them. I heard some of the legends. I've heard about the Jersey Devil. I heard about the Pineys. But so I just sort of had these like images in my head and a tone that I wanted to capture. But then as I explored it, I figured that I would sort of go through this transition from that naive explorer with these preconceived ideas to something more knowledgeable and familiar, and kind of chronicle that entire experience. So that's part of the reason why it took that long.
Yeah, definitely a labor of love. Stephanie, do you want to ask David some questions? Go for it.
Sure, yeah. So you mentioned that you wanted to evoke like how beautiful and big the Pine Barrens were. And my question is kind of maybe a strange one, but I was wondering why you chose to use the aspect ratio that you chose, because it's very film-like. And I was wondering if you ever thought about using like full screen, for example, or, you know, you see a lot of movies these days that are very beautiful and they're like in IMAX or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, the aspect ratio that I use is actually, it's not quite CinemaScope, and it's not 16:9. It was all shot in 16:9, but I cropped it to, it's really kind of my own aspect ratio. I wanted to kind of find like a middle ground between CinemaScope. It's, I really wanted the film to have more of a cinematic quality to it than a, a typical documentary. I wasn't thinking about the film as a documentary when I was filming it. I was really thinking of it as more of an impression. So I was using a lot of cinematic language in the way that it's shot, in the camera movement or lack of camera movement, very composed, uh, static shots. And so the aspect ratio just kind of went along with that. I wanted to kind of have this surreal quality that sort of takes you out of the idea that uh, it is like an objective reality, that it is actually cinema. That it's a film.
Cool. Hamza, how about you?
Definitely. I am really excited to discuss your film, so I'll get right into my question, which is, did you kind of like want the sense of community and that deep connection between the Pine Barrens and the people there that was portrayed during the conversation around the fire, which was like a recurring scene, to be the tone or like set the tone for the documentary?
Well, the fires came a little bit after. I started filming around 2011, like I said, and it was a couple years before I had, or at least a year before I had any other characters in the film besides Alan, Alan Crawford is the guy with the hat. He was sort of my primary guide through the Pine Barrens. So I did already have a tone in mind, the way that I was filming, and that changed in the first year too. I kind of like narrowed it down into a very like specific kind of style, where I was doing a lot more different things at first, but then just kind of pared it down once I realized like exactly the way that I wanted it to be filmed. The characters came later, mostly because I didn't know anyone else there. And you know, what was told to me was that people in the Pine Barrens were particularly private people, and they're not necessarily trusting of outsiders. So it really kind of took a while, you know, meeting somebody, a writer. Her name was Karen Riley, and she wrote a few books on the Pine Barrens. She invited me to kind of sit at a table at Lines on the Pines, which is like an annual Pine Barrens convention. And that's when I started meeting people and kind of including more people. And the fires came a couple years in, one, because I got a camera that was much better at low light. And I saw it as a way to kind of have this Greek chorus sort of way of presenting the tone, the mood of storytelling. But it was stretched over many years. The interesting thing about the fire is there's probably about 100 people in those fires. It's edited as if it's this one perpetual fire with this ongoing conversation. But there's probably about 10 or 11 different fires. And most of those people that you see talking to each other never actually met each other in reality. So it's really just kind of this artificial illusion, really, this edit that the way that the fires are this portal between time and place, kind of merging all these stories together, which is kind of the way that I saw the tradition and folklore in the Pine Barrens. So kind of mirrored that idea.
It's very cool. I mean, I did get a sense that some people kind of blipped in and out of the fires, but it's very cool that it seems seamless, and you get the sense that it's a recurring theme. But I had no idea that there were variations to the fire scenes. So I guess you pulled it off in that respect, David.
Thanks.
Stephanie, do you have another question for David?
Yeah, you mentioned that it took a rather long time to film this. Did you always intend for it to take? I think it was 6 years. I said it.
Yeah, it took about 6 years to film, and then another year before I finished the final edit. I didn't originally intend it to take that long, but time started to play an important aspect from the narrative point of view in where I was following this controversial pipeline decision, but then also just from a personal standpoint where I was kind of finding myself changing over that time and my relation to the forest changing and my relation to the material that I had captured changing. And so I really wanted that to be part of the narrative, that there is this flux, change from the, this explorer to the familiar, but then edit in a way that kind of keeps all those different stages present. And the other thing about the film is that it really started as a series of live performances with the Ruins of Friendship Orchestra. So I had been making short films, these kind of experimental vignettes that we started screening back in 2012. And the Ruins of Friendship Orchestra, which is a group of musicians that were all friends of mine, I would give them these edits and they would come up with scores, and we would perform them live to an audience, sometimes in Philadelphia, sometimes in the Pine Barrens, sometimes in New York, just kind of opening it up to different audiences. And it was different every time. So the film was kind of this evolving, changing, organic, living thing. The scores were always changing. The film was always changing. And in that way, it kind of also mirrored that experience of the changing experience over time. So that being such a like integral part of the formation of it, that's another reason why it had to take as long as it did.
I don't think it hurt the film, though. I think you can see the pipeline story is definitely something that kind of grows into the film. You don't get that sense right away, but it's a pivotal branch to the tree of your film, in the sense that you're following what's going to happen. And I do like the epilogue at the end, that once Christie's out of power, that the whole thing is kind of is turned off. So that was definitely something that I wanted to know more about, and I was glad that I found that out at the end. Hamsa, feel free to jump in. You guys can jump in anytime.
All right, my second question is, did you set the locations with the interviews, or did you let the interviewee kind of decide based on the places they frequented? Because they're very aesthetic locations, so I was very much wondering who made that decision.
All of the interviews happened in their own locations. I really wanted to stay as much away from talking heads as possible. And so I kind of came up with a bit of a device where everyone is working with their hands. They have a physical connection to the land. So they're either sorting cranberries on a cranberry farm, or, Mayor Gary Giberson is he's a duck carver, so he's carving the ducks. So there's a basket weaver. So I really kind of have them working with their hands, engaging in their relationship with the Pine Barrens, and then in doing that, their dialogue becomes more of like a stream of conscious, like the things that you sort of tell yourself as you're working, rather than an interview. Because I don't consider myself a great like interview documentary kind of guy. I try to just sort of sit back and let them go. I'm very much interested in like the poetry of speech and dialogue. So I really just kind of want to hear what's on people's minds. So they really just talk about whatever is on their mind, and I try to edit it in a way that kind of fits in this poetic sense. So yeah, all the locations are either their homes or place of work, or just places that they like to hang out. Like Steve Carty, the basket weaver, chose that spot on the old obsolete trail, the train tracks. So yeah, just you could leave a lot up to the subjects, and they know what's best.
And that's one of my favorite shots for sure. Do you think he was disappointed that he wasn't Native American? I mean,
spoiler.
Yeah, not really a spoiler. Not really a spoiler.
Yeah, he was certainly disappointed. He had spent most of his teens kind of engaging in this idea that he was. He only found out that he was Native American, or thought he was, a little bit later in life, he had sort of been curious about it, seeing this photograph of his grandmother. So that's what his family understood. That's what he thought. And, just being a teenager, he incorporated that into his identity. It was sort of like part of the reason why he wanted to engage more closely with the Pine Barrens, and why he got into basket weaving and other, other things like that. And so it became a big part of his identity. And it really wasn't until the 23andMe test, which and this was years after I started filming him. He had told me that he had taken this 23andMe test, and that it came up that he didn't have any Native American DNA, or so little that it doesn't show up on the test. And I thought that was such an interesting. I mean, it worked so well with this idea that I was kind of like forming in the film, like the idea of like what creates identity, what makes identity. So I asked if we could film a segment on that. And really, I think he took it pretty well, honestly. I think he was at the point where it's just like, he didn't necessarily need to be thought of as Lenape anymore. So.
Yeah. I mean, he's a piney. He is a piney, and I think you can't take that away from him, regardless. But go ahead, Stephanie.
You had mentioned the Ruins of Friendship Orchestra, and the score is beautiful. Is there anything that you would like to say about the collaboration with local groups like that and individuals, and how that impacted the making of the film? Anything additional?
Yeah, and I got into it a little bit, but yeah, so the Ruins of Friendship Orchestra, mostly Philadelphia and New Jersey musicians. They had all kind of known me and each other in different ways, but never necessarily played together previously. And they're all, some of them are classically trained, some of them are more experimental. There's Ben Warfield is a synth guy, and then you have like John Pettit and Gretchen Losey and Jesse Sparhawk, Laura Baird. They play a little more like traditional instruments, harp and viola, trumpet, and we knew that they would all sound good together for some reason. So what Alan and I did is we took them all out to the literal ruins of a town in the Pine Barrens called Friendship, where there's just these like cellar pits that is just the only thing left of this town, and just kind of had them play together in the Pine Barrens with the crickets and cicada in the background, and kind of get a sense of the atmosphere. And that really just sort of like started this project. I don't even really remember deciding that it was going to be this series of performances. So that's just what we started doing. And though that series of performances was really just so integral to the formation of the film, the way that it is now.
Is there a way to get any of their music?
There is a Bandcamp. There's not a ton of stuff on it. There's a Facebook page which has some things. I also filmed, there's one of the bonfires that we filmed was actually just them improvising around a fire. I used some of that in the score of the film, and just recently edited that together as like a 30-minute piece. So you can just kind of watch them play, improvise around a bonfire. It's online right now. It's not public, but I intend on making it public pretty soon.
Yeah, you should. So if folks look for the Ruins of Friendship Orchestra, they can find on Bandcamp some of their music. I mean, it really should be on CD. I think I would buy it.
We did make a downloadable EP, so I'll make that available as well.
Very cool. Hamsa, you get one more question, and then Stephanie. Oh, well, you get two more questions, Hamsa.
All right, very generous. Thank you. All right, so a question that I wanted to know is, did you often consult locals and people you interviewed about which places and events would be the best to kind of capture the essence in terms of filming? Because you seem to have a very well-rounded kind of depiction of the Barrens, and that's why I was wondering.
I mean, a lot of that just came from spending so many years out there and just kind of finding things, being engaged in on Instagram and on some of the forums, just kind of like seeing what people are doing. And just, I sort of built a community around the film through these performances and through social media that's how I met a lot of different people out in the Pine Barrens. And so they were often kind enough to just sort of like clue me in on, things that are happening or places that I should check out. And then Alan Crawford, he grew up in the Pine Barrens as well. And, he's being my primary guide. He showed me a lot of the locations that ended up in the film, including, these like hikes in winter blizzards through the Great Swamp, and these places that I would never think to go to. So that's it was, but a lot of that also just came from the people who I found who were interesting to talk to. So going out to Gary Giberson's farm, which is kind of a little bit more on the bay, and it's not necessarily what I think of as the Pine Barrens, but that kind of let it kind of like branch out a little bit farther into different areas. That there's really a lot of different as the elevation changes in the Pine Barrens, the plants change and the animals change, and things it's drier or wetter, marshier or swampier, and so I had a chance to kind of explore all those different locations.
Yeah, I always thought the Pine Barrens was flat. That was another thing that was very revelatory, and I love those little tree frogs. I don't know how you got shots of them. They looked really great.
Well, the thing about the Pine Barrens tree frogs is like you got to catch them if you go out on a really hot summer rainy night. That's their mating season, and you can get right up in their face, and they're pretty distracted.
Very cool. Stephanie, you get one more question, then Hamsa, and then we have to wrap up. So go for it, Steph.
No pressure. My final question is, who do you hope sees the film?
I mean, the first person that pops up in my head is John McPhee. He's the guy who wrote The Pine Barrens in 1968, 69. I don't know if he's seen the film. I think he knows about it. So I would love to, get some acknowledgement that he's seen it. He doesn't talk about the Pine Barrens quite as often anymore, but he was a primary inspiration for the film. And I mean, I love that locals have been able to see it. Not as much as, hopefully once we're finished with film festivals and I find a way to kind of stream it, though, a lot more locals will be able to see it. But there hasn't really been a lot of people who have been able to see it outside of this region. And I've been very curious about how people in other parts of the country or other parts of the world would relate to this, because I think there's a lot of universal themes that I think there's things about the Pine Barrens that could relate to people, especially across America, because I think it talks a lot about American identity. So.
That's the great thing about going virtual. We have people from Germany, there's somebody from France, there's somebody from Australia, people from all around the US that are checking out our festival this way. So there is some kind of reach. So hopefully that'll benefit you. Go ahead, Hamsa, you get the last question because we have to wrap up.
I am truly honored to have the last question. All right, and my question is, what would you want people to be encouraged to do after watching your film?
It's really just a matter of getting out into the natural world, spending some time learning about it, and appreciating it, because I think that's the first step in actually trying to preserve it. As Alan says in the film, like, you really just don't try to save a place unless you experience it, unless you love it. So I think that's people just need to be more connected. And I think it's the kind of thing is like, if you know the names of certain plants and animals, you're just less likely to ignore it if they're threatened. So yeah, and also to accept the natural world on its own terms. I think that's really important. I see a lot of people who go out there and they're still like, blasting their stereos or ripping through it on four wheels, and they don't necessarily really appreciate it in the way that, just that quiet, contemplative way that it really only reveals itself once you kind of just stay quiet and let it reveal itself. So yeah, that's what I hope people do.
Wonderful, some great questions. And we're very excited to, to present your film to our audience. It's a very important film. It is truly an environmental documentary, and it celebrates this region. And we hope you'll all come and check it out on Friday, October 9th. Again, go to our website, which is njfilmfest.com, and go to the schedule page and click on the link there that'll send you to our virtual site. I want to say thank you to David Scott Kessler for hanging out with us. I want to say thank you to Stephanie Mann and to Hamsa Hassan for asking some wonderful questions. And we look forward to seeing you at the screenings. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.